This is the Politics of Everything, and I'm your host, Amber Daines. Welcome to the podcast where we want to discuss the politics of everything, from money to motherhood, nutrition to narcissism, startups to secularism, the environment to equality, and much more. Our guests are experts in their field or topic of choice, even if you've not yet heard their name. This is a bipartisan podcast, so while we love exploring varied views and get a buzz from a healthy debate, by no means is this a one-sided forum for any one political view. So please listen up and enjoy the politics of everything. Bronwen Sciortino is here to discuss the politics of resilience. She's an author and self-professed simplicity expert who spent almost 2 decades as a high-powered, award-winning executive before experiencing a life-changing event that forced her to stop and ask the question, what if there's a better way to live? Through a journey of self-discovery, Bronwen gained the knowledge and wisdom to write a book, Keep It Super Simple, Tips from a Recovering Perfectionist, and encourages people to step away from a traditional life if they want to. Working globally through corporate programs, conferences, retreats, professional mentoring, and in the online world, Bronwen teaches people how easy it is to live differently. Welcome to the show, Bronwen.
Thanks so much for having me, Amber. I can't wait to see where our conversation leads us.
It should be fun. So diving back into your childhood, growing up, how would you describe your experience as a kid in a few sentences? What kind of kid were you and what did you like to do?
I spent my entire time outdoors, either roaming the countryside, riding the horses, playing with the animals, or on the sporting field. I had a very free and natural upbringing. I pretty much lived, all the aspects of my life around those things.
So as a kid, did you have a dream career and did you achieve that?
I was always going to be a lawyer. That was just the thing that I always wanted to do. No, I didn't end up being a lawyer. I ended up in the corporate world, teaching people how to grow their businesses in the small to medium enterprise space. So, it took a really strange trajectory from, the one thing I always wanted to be when I was growing up, but still ended up in the corporate world.
And so your early career, what did that involve? What did it look like? And did you have any lessons that you learned over that time in corporate?
Yeah, my early career, I ended up in a very male-dominated industry, and my early career was very much as a young female in a male-dominated industry. And there were lots of lessons that came with that, and mostly how to actually succeed and grow and develop and remain true to myself within that environment. And that was something that I found very difficult, and it took me a long time and a significant health crisis to actually really learn my lessons around that.
And what were some of those lessons in terms of, I guess, maybe resilience or health or well-being? What were some of the key things that, reflecting now, you realise were the lessons that you had to learn?
Yeah, I think probably there's two main lessons, and the first one of those is that we don't have to be stressed and exhausted to be successful. I think that as a society we hold that belief at the moment, and with the speed of our lives and the invasion from every corner of our lives now, there is so much pressure 24/7 for us to be constantly, on the money, on the path, achieving something every second of every day. And that brings a significant level of stress and exhaustion with it. And along the way, we've just accepted that that is normal. And there is nothing normal about being stressed and exhausted, at a chronic level on a constant basis. And I think even just using the words on a chronic level on a constant basis, there'd be a lot of people that would just be going, oh yeah, but stress is normal. And I think we've just accepted now that these significant levels of being so tired and under so much pressure all the time is something that is just a normal part of life.
Absolutely.
Genetically we're not built to actually be able to maintain that and sustain that for long periods of time. And so that does significantly impact on our health, both physical and mental, and we're just completely oblivious to it because we've been taught to believe that it's normal. The second thing, I guess, that comes off the back of that is that we are so afraid of change in our lives that we're now more afraid of change than we are afraid of dying. And
why do you say that? I'm curious about that. What is it about that change element you think that's created so much fear?
Yeah, I think, if you look at the way that we're socially conditioned and to a certain extent brainwashed as we're children, and that comes from, our friends, our family, the community, the school we go to, the sports club we play at, the music place that we go to, any of those things, they all have their rules around what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, what's acceptable, what's not. And over time, we just get pushed and pulled and squashed into a shape that's not naturally our own. And when you look at the way that social conditioning occurs, it usually occurs with the bad things being, really threatened with punishment and ostracism and all of those sorts of things that make us feel really uncomfortable and really bad within ourselves. So we naturally move away from those things. And now I think that our lives are so visible, and with social media we have to be so switched on and we have to appear like we're achieving something all the time. We're more and more afraid to step out of line because it's no longer just the circle of friends around us that have something to say. It's people from all over the world that perhaps don't even know us who can actually now have a say, and it can be so on such a much more significant scale, the backlash, I guess, around that conditioning if somebody decides that you've done something that's not appropriate. And so that level of fear around who we are, how we behave, what we do and how we do it is so much more heightened than it ever used to be. And so we now drive ourselves in a way that's not necessarily aligned with who we are. And we end up in situations where we're under so much pressure for such a long period of time that we actually can't physically or mentally take the pressure anymore. And it just creates a trigger point where we collapse.
And that obviously happened to you. That was something that you're obviously telling something from a personal perspective. And I guess on the back of that, what would be a shining example of a time when you really had to learn to become more resilient?
Yeah, well, I guess firstly, the thing to understand about resilience is that that also is so misunderstood, and it's been taken to a place now where resilience really is seen to be your ability to keep going and keep turning up and not getting sick and all of these sorts of things. But resilience is actually your ability to stay true to who you are and aligned with your values no matter what is going on around you. And those are two very different things. And so people are often really confused when, it becomes a bit of a buzzword and I've had people sitting in front of me in a mentoring session saying, my boss has just said that I need to be more resilient, but, all of these things. And I don't understand because I thought it was resilient, but, and so it's really quite a confusing word to start with. So for me, I had to, when I collapsed in a significant way. And it took me 2 years of really hard, long, confronting, daunting and overwhelming work with health professionals to get myself back to a point where I could actually exist in just a day-to-day life. And so through that process, I really had to learn who I was again. I had to reconnect with the things that were important to me. And along the way, built a structure and a platform that allowed me to really create resilience moving forward. So because I really understand so deeply and am so connected with who I am now, it's really easy for me to ebb and flow through different stages and different challenges in life because I know the things that are aligned with who I am and not. So I guess, a lot of my work now is about teaching people how to actually create that platform so they don't have to go to the level that I went to.
Absolutely. So how do you define real resilience in an era which, like you say, it has become a buzzword?
Yeah, I think real resilience is really about understanding who you are and coming back to the basics of being able to look at yourself in the mirror and know who you're looking at.
So what would be an example of that? Like, is this about your values? Is this about, what you want to achieve? How do you define that in a really granular way?
Yeah, I think the first step is to actually understand how you re-energize your energy. So we all have an energy tank within us, and a lot of us are really just constantly draining from that energy tank and not refilling it. So I think the first thing to understand is, where you actually get your energy from, how you get it, and then make sure you've got those activities every day in some form that allow you to refuel your energy tanks. Once you can do that, you've got a better connection with who you are yourself. You can then start understanding and defining what your values are. And once you know what your values are, it's really easy to decide what you do and don't want to be doing in your life because you know what is and isn't aligned with your values. So I think that makes it so much easier in moving forward and in actually challenging yourself to take those little steps to make some changes because you're so much sure of the footing that you've got when you're walking.
And you do harp on this idea that we all need added resilience because we are more stressed and exhausted than ever before. And probably instead of being more resilient, quote unquote, we need to learn to be more connected and simplify our lives. So can you sort of explain how you might have done that in your own life? What's the simplification piece and how can that give us perspective to perhaps become resilient in a good way?
Yeah, so for me, I really have a look at the simplicity piece, and that is really about, really getting rid of the things that are complex in your life. So a perfect example of that for me was, I found myself in a situation where I was trying to be three different people in different situations. So I had Bronwen at home, Bronwen at work, and then Bronwen in a social setting. Bronwen at home and Bronwen at work had different surnames. And Bronwen at home and Bronwen at work had different signatures. And, that was fine when you can keep those places separate. But then when you start travelling to work and you've got Bronwen at home's surname and you've got to remember who you're signing with in different situations and all of that sort of stuff, there's so much complexity around that. And that all came out of a situation where my maiden name was so much easier to say and pronounce than my married name was. And I had a corporate identity and all of those things. And so I thought I'll just keep my maiden name for work and, at home I'll just be, my married name. But it created such a complex situation that just added pressure that didn't need to be there. So one of the first things I did when I was going through my recovery from a breakdown was to actually look at those things and those areas where things really were complex and just created, added things I didn't need, and I just completely simplified them. I became one person, just did one thing, one signature, one surname, all of those sorts of things, and there's a whole heap of pressure that drops out of your life. I think also it's really about understanding exactly how your life is set up. So things like, if you catch yourself comparing your life to somebody else's life that you see in social media, for example, you really need to put an overlay on that in your thinking and just say, but hang on, that's social media, that's actually a virtual world. I'm comparing my real life with a virtual world. They're never going to match. So it's understanding some of those simple things and really just allowing yourself a bit of self-compassion that just says, hang on, I'm okay, I'm doing okay, I'm doing what's aligned with my values, I'm doing what's aligned with who I am. I don't need to worry about all that other stuff.
It's interesting you mentioned those two examples. Number one, I have still kept my maiden name after 12 years for work. So I'm Amber Daines and I'm Amber Unger in the rest of my life. And I haven't even thought that that's made my life complicated. I do know what you mean about the administrivia, but I guess I kind of must be old journalist in me. I just can't get rid of my maiden name. And my married name, Amber Unger, just doesn't sound that great, to be honest, phonetically for me. So I went from, one name which I love to one that I wasn't so happy with. But yes, I think it depends, I guess, what your tipping points are. But the piece about social media is interesting because I've got a journalist friend who you would imagine needs to be on social media for her work. She's a senior freelancer in the business space, but she actually has no social media accounts now, none. And she reckons that's changed her life completely because she has a high volume workload. And she just said, I feel like it's a chore, all this keeping up with Instagram and tweeting and, all the things that she said, now I read like 2 books a week because I just don't do that stuff. So I think for some people it'll be about even taking that next step is what I'm saying and actually maybe opting out of social media for a period or, simplifying how many accounts they have because that definitely is something which didn't exist 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, totally. And I find as well, I have social media. I have it for my business because my business is global, and that's it's actually a really easy and simple way for me to connect with followers from all around the world. But I'm only posting once or twice a day. I've only got 3 accounts, and those things are relatively connected. So I don't necessarily need to do 3 different things for the 3 different accounts. I've really simplified how I use it, when I use it, and the role that it plays in my life. I don't spend hours trawling through it. My personal account pretty much is just a share from my work accounts. I think you're right. It's a bit like the surname for you kind of doesn't create a massive issue, whereas for me it created this massive complexity. It's different horses for different courses, and I think that's a really important thing to sort of talk about is we are all unique individuals, and what works for me won't necessarily work for everybody else. But there might be bits of it that you can take and say, hey, I might give that a go. So I think, for your journalist friend, it's the perfect example of, this stuff was just creating havoc in my life. I've got rid of it, I've simplified what I'm doing, and now I get to do these other things, which I really love.
And it also means her and I catch up in real life more often because she has no idea what's happening in my life. And so I think from a relationship point of view, if relationships with close friends are important to you, that is one way, I guess, to create the perspective on that.
Totally, yeah. And I think that's something really that's part of that connection piece is, to reduce the stress and the exhaustion is to start getting back to those things that really feed us from a soul level and, make us happy and create that light and colour in our lives instead of just the dull, grey, tired, exhausted slog.
Absolutely. So where do many people go wrong when they try to be more resilient in your experience, maybe from your coaching work that you do? I mean, is there any sort of patterns where people kind of, the man up language or the get on with it, or I'm just going to work harder and then I'll get a break? I mean, is there sort of some mindsets which people adopt when they maybe are stressed and they actually think they're being resilient and they're not?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is soldier on. You just push through. If you can push through, just get through this, just get to the end of this and then it'll all be okay. But the problem is because you've created that environment and you've created that habit and you've created that way of life, that becomes your way of life. So as you just push through this, the next thing comes in and then you just push through that. So I think the biggest thing that I see is, that fear around change. And, I can't do anything differently because.
Yes.
Or it's okay for you because I don't know about you, but in my life, it's this. So it becomes the comparison game.
Yes, which we're all guilty of.
It's like you might live your life like that and that's fine for you because of all of these, big long list of reasons. But I can't do that because of this. And it's like, okay, well, for starters, the way I live my life might not work for you at all in any format anyway. So really it's about just having a look at what you need, making sure you've got those energy creating activities so that you're refueling your tanks for starters. And then I think secondly, the next thing is people always know what they want. They always know the thing that they really would like to have in their life, but they're either too afraid to say or they won't say because they're too afraid they won't get it. And then their life really is a slog because they can't have the thing they want. And I think the thing is people go straight to overwhelm in things.
Yes.
They say, I'd really like to do this, but then it becomes just too big and they can't nut their way out.
They can't chunk it down at all. And they
how to get there.
You almost talk yourself out of it, don't you? Sometimes you sort of say, I'd love to move to, outside, a capital city and have a tree change, but these are all the reasons I can't, or I've got to wait.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it goes straight to overwhelm. So it's really about just making sure that, here's the thing you really want, and that's great. Let's just not even worry about going to overwhelm. Now let's have a look at the little steps you can take to work your way towards doing that. Because I think we really need to combat this need to have everything immediately. I have to succeed immediately. I've got to have this immediately. I've got to have all the money immediately. I've got to do all these things immediately. And then that just becomes pressure and stress and overwhelm. Whereas if you just say, here's the thing I want and here's the little things I can do to get there, let's just focus on the first one. And then you know that you're heading in the direction. And it's really interesting how it takes a little bit of time to start with because you're undoing, sometimes decades worth of mindset and habits. But the more you actually take these little steps and you just take that one step repeatedly and then all of a sudden that's a habit. And then it becomes, really quite quick after that, to head in the direction of the goal that you want. So it's sometimes it's just undoing some of the conditioning that we've been given and really just opening your mind to think about something in a little bit, of a different way, but that can open the way that you see it so significantly that, you can make massive changes in your life just from tiny little steps that you take.
So can you share with us the most important or valuable people in your life that might have been mentors or even family or friends? If so, who are they and what have they taught you about true success and maybe resilience too?
Yeah, I think probably there's been two really significant mentors in my life, and actually a third one is just presenting now, which is beautiful because it's lovely that in different stages of your life and in different ways people can really present. And the first of those was a lady called Mary Dwyer from Impact Solutions International. And she really was the first mentor that I had in my very early 20s. And she presented it at a time when I was really struggling with that male-dominated industry and really struggling to find my way around the boys' club and all of those things, that nobody admits exist, but, we all know they do. And so she really taught me about, my first steps in resilience in terms of really just staying connected with who you are. And she really taught me about that remaining connected with the feminine, irrespective of the fact that I was in a male-dominated industry. And she really taught me, I guess, my first footsteps along the pathway of being able to really change the way that your mind works and identify patterns in your mind and all of those sorts of things. My second mentor she actually presented for me about 12 months into my recovery from my breakdown. And that was the first, that was Melanie Ryan from the Melanie Ryan Applied Institute of Consciousness. And she really started opening up for me a whole world of information around energy medicine and energy healing, which had been a set of information that was completely closed off to me before.
Yes.
I just, mentally and from a conditioning point of view and all of those sorts of things, just nothing that I'd ever considered before. And so I actually started down the track of doing energy alignments and all those sorts of things whilst I was in sort of recovery from my breakdown. And that whole world opened up to me of, meditation and energy alignments and all of those sorts of things that just hadn't been on my radar before. And then the third sort of mentor, she's actually also a really good friend, is Freya Sanson, and she's from Earthheart. And so now actually that's presenting a much more sort of spiritual, I guess, education around the different sort of facets that are available down that track. And also the way that the corporate world can actually be connected with that sort of energy healing and those sorts of things, those worlds to go together to start to accelerate people forward, to actually help them move through these times of significant change in the way that we're living.
Absolutely. So to wrap up, what would be your best advice for us all to become more successful in the politics of resilience?
Yeah, I guess, probably the biggest lesson I learned, if I'm allowed to only say one from my journey.
I'm being disciplined for you.
Is actually that there's nothing I have in my life now that wasn't readily, easily and openly available to me before. I was just so closed off to all the opportunities in my life and to just how easily we can move forward in a different way that I just couldn't see it. And so really taking the time to learn about that resilience and, how you can more easily connect with who you are, with your values, with how you re-energize your energy tanks and refuel, that I think, is the catalyst for taking you forward in a different way. And I would say to any individual, don't wait for somebody else to actually create a training or allow you to attend a training or any of that sort of stuff around these things. If you don't have an employer that supports you in actually making these, changes to live differently, or you don't have family members that back you in these things, just step up and do it, because it really is the difference is living in a different way. And if you wait for someone else, you could be waiting forever.
Absolutely. Well, we've really appreciated your candidness and personal stories today. If you want to connect further with Bronwen, there will be some details on our show notes. You've been listening to The Politics of Everything. Until next time, keep well. Thanks for listening today. If you've enjoyed The Politics of Everything, we thrive on feedback. So please add a short review and share the podcast with your network and your friends and family. I'm also always on the hunt for fabulous new guests, so if you've got a view to share and an idea how to get our listeners excited, please email me at amber@bespokecoms, that's BESPOKECOMMS.com.au, and we'll be sure to get back to you. Until next time.